Hey guys, subscribe for daily knife content. And if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for links to some great online retailers. There's also individual links for knives that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Kansept Prickle front flipper. Very, very interesting knife. I've got a lot to say about it as per usual. You can find links for this guy right down in the description. It is very available and, as far as knives go in general, really not all that expensive. We're going to talk about that here. It does bear a passing resemblance. Let me clean that off. Sorry, there's a hair on it. To the Real Steel Metamorph and in some ways the Boost Blade Smoke, but this knife is different enough. I mean, essentially we've got front flippers that have slender profiles. That's the similarity there. But yeah, I would agree to anybody who says that, but I do not think that this knife is a ripoff. I'll link this guy down below as well as Kansept Knives in general so that you can check out what else they've got going on. Thanks so much to Kansept Knives for sending this to me for review. Thanks to my generous patrons who are supporting me right now. There's a link down there for that as well. And please follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Let's go ahead and get a measurement of this guy. This is a fairly large knife. It just has a really slender profile. Overall length, 8 inches. Blade length, 3.5. And cutting edge is also 3.5 inches. How about some size comparisons up against the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Rat Model 2? You can see here it's kind of, it's a long knife. It's just kind of in between, essentially. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and Para 3? Once again, it's just kind of an in-between situation where its skinniness is being made very apparent here. And last but not least, we have the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue, and its little brother, the Mini Griptilian. This is definitely the same length as the Ritter Hogue. It's got a little teeny tiny bit more cutting edge, and it's just skinnier. Once again, let's go ahead and do carry profile before I forget about that. So thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a no really thick knife, but might surprise you to learn that it is actually a little bit thicker. We do have some contouring there, which is kind of nice. I mean, if it is going to be a little bit thicker than knives like the Para 3, I kind of always like to see that there's some contouring. That's just a personal preference thing. Height and length, though, up against PM2 and Para 3, nowhere near as tall. Close to the same length as the Para 3, but again, not quite. I think that's gonna, provide, even if it is a little bit thicker, that's gonna be a huge factor in terms of comfort for a lot of people. Let's go ahead and measure the blade stock thickness. I'm gonna guess that that's about 120 thousandths or so. Sorry, I'm trying to zero out. Sometimes the calipers insist, but yeah. Whoops, I slipped off of it. We gotta reset it. I'm trying to grab the front flipper here because it's sunk into the body. Yeah, okay, so about 120 thousandths there, which is fine. That's kind of what I've seen from a lot of Kansept knives. No, not all of them, though not all of them. Inside, where did my flashlight go? There it is. You can get my flashlight down in the description. I think oh my gosh, we are way too bright today. Oh my gosh, we're having technical difficulties. Well, I'll tell you what. You can see in there without the flashlight, the mode will have to be reset. You can see that there is milling on the steel liners, which is great. That's going to reduce the weight just a little bit, which is meaningful and impactful on this knife. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check on this guy. So, T8 most likely for the pivot. You can get my tools down in the description as well. Yeah, in fact, I know this, and I'll tell you why. It's because I took it apart. And I'll explain why here in a sec. These, I'm not going to check them. They're T6. This guy has minimal hardware. T6 screws, not that big of a deal. Just be careful. There were some complications with taking this apart. Some minor frustrations. We'll talk about that here in a sec. Let's go ahead and weigh it. Weight on the Kansept Prickle. Coming in at 3.21 ounces, which might be heavier than some people might expect. It has the ratios thing that people like, right? 3.21 ounces is not a lot of weight to me, and considering the profile is very slender, I think a lot of people are going to find that this is just a generally comfortable object. Depends on your preferences, depends on what kind of pants you're wearing, and it also depends on where you live and whether or not it's actually legal. Those of you who can legally carry it, I think you'll find that it is a pretty comfortable object to carry. So this is a front flipper, and it works really well. And part of the reason why it works really well is because it is a larger object. This is not a tiny, like Feist-sized front flipper. So I find that there is plenty of room to engage that front flipper, and it works beautifully. It's nice and snappy. It's also not an exposed frame lock. The liner lock is Liner Lonk, L-O-N-K. What does that mean? Liner lock is not countersunk into the liner, but it is underneath the scale. So it doesn't really matter where you put your hands. There's not a lot of room back here, right? It doesn't really matter where you place your hands. You're going to be able to deploy it. And it does that efficiently. That is the only way to deploy this knife. I don't know about you guys. With front flippers that are dedicated front flippers, it kind of starts to wear on your thumb after a little bit, right? And it's not going to matter to people who are just needing to get this knife out and use it really quickly. But if you are going to sit around on your couch and play with it, even though this is comfortable to engage the first time, after the 20th time, it is going to start to bother your finger. For me, now, somebody who carries a dedicated front flipper, right? They're probably adapted to it fully. They probably have no problem consistently opening it, right? But if you are transitioning away from a thumb stud opener or the Spyderco hole or a flipper, something like that, those are, I think, easier deployment mechanisms to pick up and adapt to than something like a front flipper. So while this is dedicated as a front flipper, I think you're much more likely to accidentally throw or drop this thing or not deploy it fully and accidentally poke yourself, right? It's something I think newer people should be aware of, but like I said, as is the case with all things, you will adapt to it if you really, really want to carry it. Sorry, we were shaking the entire thing today. So what we have here is blue G10, and it does have a peel ply texturing, and then we have these black liners underneath, and honestly, I really like the black liners in contrast with the blue. Now, not all of them look like this. There are a few different variants, different colors. You can check them all down below. Some of the variants are a little bit more expensive. I saw a carbon fiber one with some bronze hardware. That guy was about $10 more expensive, right? Depends on what you get. But in the case of this blue and the black, right? Some of them have black liners. Maybe they all have black liners. I think it looks really, really good. I like that a lot. The edges, nicely knocked down. No sharpness, anything like that. In terms of ergonomics, there's not really a whole lot locking you in other than this area right here, which is also the access to the liner lock, and that is plentiful. It's very easy to disengage, and I don't have a problem with that. And also, where the knife comes down, just barely, you can catch right there where it's basically the sharpening choil, right? But you do need to make sure your fingers are out of the way, because if they're not pushed all the way up against that spot, then what you're going to connect with is the actual blade, and that's not what you want. But for the most part, this is very easy to manipulate, whether you actually want to snap it out or if you want to do this, which honestly is much safer and a little bit more, it'll be a consistent means of opening for newer people versus like trying to snap it out like that, but it's all good. But yeah, fit and finish, I mean, the way that the hardware's fitted, everything like that, it's great. The action on this guy, so the action's fine now, and it's all right. It's about what you'd expect for this quality of knife. It runs on bearings. It is smooth. It's not like drop shut. Oh my gosh, it's the most frictionless thing ever. No, but it's fine. It'll work. The detent's tuned properly. The shape of the nub right here, the front flipper, is knocked down and you can engage with it easily, right? The action's good. It's exactly what you'd expect on something like this. When I got it, it was a little bit tight, right? So I looked in there because I was feeling the action. I didn't really know it was tight yet, but I looked in there and I was like, are those phosphor bronze washes? I was like, maybe that's why the action. I was like, oh, that'd be interesting if it was phosphor bronze. And obviously I could just go look like on their website, or I could message them, or I could look on Blade HQ. I wanted to take it apart. Sometimes I'm compelled to take knives apart, and I don't always get to take everything apart because a lot of the knives on this channel are sent by my audience, and some of them don't want me doing that, which is totally understandable. This was sent by Kansept. It's mine now, right? So I was like, yeah, I want to get in there. So start to take it apart, immediately figure out that this is free spinning. Okay, not that big of a deal. Kind of frustrating though, not that big of a deal. So you got to have two torsioners. So I start doing that and I realize, holy crap, there is a lot of Loctite on this thing. It wasn't red Loctite, it was just a lot of blue thread locker. It got to the point where I realized it was all of my hand strength to finally get that all undone. This arm actually cramped while I was trying to get that out of there. It finally did come out, but listen, Kansept or any company now, it's not just Kansept that is having an issue with this. Guys, D-shaped pivot barrels, something that makes the pivot captive. That's frustrating. And it was made, there was something else that would have been simple, but it was made more frustrating by the fact that I had to use two. It just sucks. Free spinning pivots suck. And a lot of times, normally, if I wasn't going to take this knife apart, I would go, yeah, it's got two T6. It should be pretty simple to take apart, because most of the time, even if it is free spinning, it is simple. But this knife reminded me that that's not always the case. Now, it's going to sound like I'm really going to be coming down on it for this, but it wasn't enough to bum me out completely about the knife. I just want to share with you guys my experience. So I get this out, take this off, and I find out it is running on bearings. It was just a little bit tight. That was the end. So I just had to loosen it a little bit. So I get this back in. There's a lip, and how the scale wanted to fit, it kept sliding around. So I kept accidentally getting the scale underneath the lip of the pivot, so I'd tighten down, and it couldn't tighten down all the way because I got stuck on top. So it was frustrating because I had to have that other bit over here. I had to have it holding it in place. You might have thought, well, why didn't you tighten the screws down so it acted as a guide? I actually ended up doing that so that because I thought, well, it should line up correctly. It still didn't. It was still a little bit off. So I had to hold this down, kind of hold my driver with two fingers like this, tighten this down to hold this in place, then get these down, then take both. That sucked. All of that would have been made much simpler if the pivot was D-shaped, like the inside of a Benchmade knife, so that it can't move. Captive pivot is always going to be better than two heads, right? And I'm not going to tell you, guys, that there's a certain level, like some people are like, that's way too much Loctite, or this, I mean, more or less, whatever. It's made much simpler. Even if there is excess blue Loctite, if it's red Loctite, that sucks. Red Loctite should never be used on a knife, in my opinion. But blue Loctite, even if it's in excess, I can still get it out of there because it's much easier for me to apply the torque that's required to undo that with something like this, right? If the pivot is captive. This sucked. I got it, but it was frustrating, right? What would normally have been a 5 to 10 minute job was actually a 25-minute job putting it back together, and it was frustrating, right? So anyways, it went back together. It wasn't that bad. It's not the worst thing in the world, but Kansept, D-shaped pivots. Please, I don't like the free spinning pivot thing. Anyways, let's talk about the blade here. So we have the Kansept logo, and then of course we have T1012A4. I don't know what that is. I wish it wasn't there, but it is. Moving over to the other side, you can see it's Max Kachuk. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but that would be the designer. Then it says Prickle. It's fine. I don't feel like we need to have the name of the knife on there because we, because we, in the circumstance where you have it in your hands, you likely bought it. But okay, maybe some people forget. Sometimes I forget the names of knives. This is 154 cm. That's one of my favorite things about this knife is that it comes in my favorite user steel. I love this steel. Very fine grain structure. It takes a very fine edge. It holds a decent edge for a while. Reasonably tough and also stainless. It's wonderfully well-rounded, and it's very nice to see this steel at the sub $100 mark. I'm very happy that they're using this steel. I couldn't be happier. I don't think there's a better choice for this price range. Unless you live in an area where salt water is the thing, then you're going to want a totally different steel. But for a lot of people, this is going to be excellent. I think the blade looks good, and it has Kansept's tumbled finish on it, which is just great. It's an excellent example of a good tumbled finish. I like it a lot. Jimping extends way out here, so you can actually, comfortably rest your thumb into the blade here and get a lot of control over it. We didn't talk too much about ergonomics. I was going to say, you've got a lot of freedom here because the handle's pretty long. So honestly, you can choke all the way back to here. You can get kind of medium, right? You can kind of choke up. There's not a lot locking you in other than this area right here that's meant to allow you to engage the liner lock, but it does work. I'm kind of locked in. Peel ply texturing gives me a little bit. It's not an ergonomic masterpiece, right? But they did achieve this aesthetic. It looks good, and you can hang on to it. I feel the pocket clip just a teeny tiny little bit, but not really all that bad, right? Ergonomics, they're okay. I'd give them a B, right? Considering how this looks, the aesthetic they were trying to achieve, I think it's all right. I like that the jimping extends out here. It's aggressive enough to catch your thumb, but not so much that it hurts, right? Or it's obnoxious. The corners of the blade, nicely knocked down, so we don't have unnecessary sharpness out here. I like the fuller. It's not something that's accessible to do any sort of fancy reverse flicking or anything like that, but it does look good, and it's not sharp. It'll probably catch debris and crap as you cut things, but it's not really that big of a deal. The nose of the blade does drop just a little bit. So I'm not sure exactly what we call this. I guess we just call it a drop point, but it's almost drops. If it were more extreme or the blade was taller, right, or the belly was a different shape, it would, it's kind of like what a sheep's foot does, but that's not really what this is. It's just maybe a modified, I guess we call it a modified drop point. You can see there the curvature of the blade. It's not super thin behind the edge, and that's mainly because the blade is so short, like this way. There's not a lot of room for it to drop, but that's fine. It'll still cut. It'll still slice. It's just not going to be an open L or a laser beam, right? There is a flat that carries out about 75% the length of the blade, and honestly, there is reasonable thickness out to the tip, so I wouldn't say this way, you know, that it looks ultra, you know, delicate, but there really just isn't a lot of material out here. It's a long, skinny blade. Your puncture task is going to be made easier by a long, skinny blade, right? Slicing task, not so much. I mean, it's still going to do it, but not as good as some other blades that are taller. It'll get the trick done. You're generally going to be able to do what you would think you would do with this knife, which is basically just get into packages and do little things here and there with your knife, right? It's going to be fine. This is a liner lock, and the stop pin is actually attached to the blade, and it goes through. There's, you know, you've seen the inside of those pivots. There's kind of a slot on both sides. That's fine. That's a nice system. I like that. There is a lanyard hole back here for people who like lanyards. Couple of standoffs. This is my favorite type of construction because it's easy to get a rag in there and clean it out. So that's great. Pocket clip, very simple, sort of bent, sort of cucumber-shaped clip. That's fine. That'll work. It actually works pretty well with a knife that's long and skinny like this because the clip and the knife both look long and skinny, and that's fine. Some people might have preferred that they did a tumbled liner and like satin hardware and a satin clip, but I don't know. I kind of like the black. I think it looks nice. There is a continuous ramp underneath the pocket clip, so it should rise to meet most thicknesses of pocket seams. And it carries kind of medium. There's not a whole lot of the knife sticking up out of your pocket, so I don't have a problem with this. Like I said, you know, this side is the second adjustment head, and that's kind of a bummer, but the rest of the knife on this side looks much the same as the front. Now, it was centered. When I put it back together, it came off center, and I just couldn't be bothered to mess with it anymore. I was like, no, there is an easy trick to center your blade. You can check out that video on my controversy and discussion playlist, right? I should have a how-to playlist, but that's where it is. It's easy to do. I'm sure I could get this blade back to center. It was perfectly centered when I got it. It's just not right now, and I just don't want to mess with it anymore, so don't judge it too hard. The lockup, it is engaging in the same place as where I got it before I disassembled it, about 35%. There is no blade play up, down, left, or right. It's fine. No, you know, lock stick or anything like that, so it's good. You can trust the fit and finish, generally speaking, on Kansept knives is going to be really good. I have had one knife from them, and I've had a lot now that were sent to me, but I've had one knife of them off-centered. Everything else, always solid, good action. This was just a little tight from the factory. So, final conclusions on this thing. If you don't like long, skinny knives, you're not going to like this. It's kind of weird that it's a little bit thicker than the Para 3. That might bother some people, but it's not really that big of a deal. The blade length is going to make this not totally legal for everybody. The front flipper nature of it, especially that, you know, considering it is a dedicated front flipper, that's something that people, you know, people who are new to front flippers, you're going to have to adapt to. You have no other option, though you can simply just wheel it out, right? Again, not that big of a deal. Because the blade is long and sort of narrow, it's not super thin behind the edge, but that's fine. It's still going to cut just fine. I hate that it's not, like, normally I'm like, it's a free spinning pivot, no big deal. And a lot of times it isn't that big of a deal, right? But on this knife, this was a great example of why that sucks. Because it made other processes that would have been mildly annoying, it made them really annoying. Because I had to always be holding in that other, you know, that other driver. So that sucks. D-shaped pivot barrels, right? I mean, is that a deal breaker for the knife? No, but it was frustrating. T6 screws, not that big of a deal. Those came out easier than the pivot. There's a great example of another element that can actually make something like a T8 pivot that I always, you know, hail, right? I'm always like, oh, T8 is better than T6. Well, in this situation, right? So these were fine. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, ergonomically, again, it's not an A+, but you can definitely hold on to it. So what do I think about this? I think it's pretty good. I'm especially happy with the price. This guy comes in at $75. You could make an argument that between the $75 and the $125 point in the knife world is the most underpopulated with really good models. So I think it's kind of neat that Kansept is attacking the lower end of that. I say attacking. They're going for the lower end of that, right? We need more great models in the 75 to, because it's like, excuse me, you have the budget territory right around $50, and then it jumps up to like the $200. Like that, there's not a lot in between that's like really, really good. Now, I'm not saying this is the best thing I've ever handled in that price territory, but 154 cm, G10 bearings, good design, a good front flipper that's easy to manipulate. Yeah, I like this a lot. It's got some quirks, right? I don't personally like long, skinny knives, but can I recommend this? Yeah. this is good. I like this a lot. I hope Kansept continues to, push and release other models, because I'll buy G10 and 154 cm with good fit and finish all day at the $75 mark. Like I said, some of them get a little bit more expensive, like some of the variants of this, but yeah, this knife starts out at 75 bucks. I'm not going to complain about that. That's a good price. Guys, that's going to be pretty much it. Like I said, you can find this knife right down in the description and all the forms that it comes in. And you can also find Kansept knives in general right down below. I'll make sure that that link goes to all of their currently available models, so check those out. Thanks again to Kansept for sending this in. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.